In the past 3 years, more than 10,000 people lost their lives trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea to get to Europe. No longer just the cradle of civilization or a sunny tourist destination, the Mediterranean has become the symbol of Europe's moral and political dilemmas. The Mediterranean Sea, after all, has long been the geographical embodiment of a paradox at the heart of Europe. On the one hand, Europe strives to separate itself from its eastern and southern Mediterranean neighbors by treating the sea as a border. On the other hand, Europe relies on locations and cultures in the Mediterranean for much of what it calls its cultural heritage. In today's increasingly xenophobic political climate, then, it is easy to forget that the Mediterranean and Mediterranean migrations are part and parcel of Europe's history and identity. The story of migration is as old as the story of Europe itself. Take the case of Europa, Europe's mythological counterpart and the origins of the continent's name. Europa, a princess from ancient Phoenicia in modern-day Lebanon and Syria, was abducted from her homeland by the god Zeus. Zeus forcibly carried Europa across the eastern Mediterranean to the island of Crete, where she gave birth to Minos, the founder of one of the oldest European civilizations. So Europa was not European to begin with. It was her displacement, by which I mean her movement from her homeland to somewhere else, that created Europe. So what can Europa's story and others like hers teach us about the way we talk and debate about the current refugee crisis in Europe today? As a scholar of literature and a filmmaker, I'm interested in the ways in which Mediterranean migrations are represented in literature, film, and visual art, including how migrants represent themselves. Artistic expressions have the advantage of communicating the experience of displacement beyond the facts alone. They offer thoughts, metaphors, dreams, frustrations, and hopes. One of the key findings of my research is that the first-hand experience of displacement has a direct effect on both the content and the form of these creative works. This is significant because stories and other works of art are some of the main vehicles through which we come to know ourselves, our communities, and the wider world. My dissertation examines a selection of creative works about events of forced Mediterranean migration from antiquity to the present day. These include the displacement of Europeans, including many Greeks, to the Middle East during the Second World War. Another event that I study is the internal displacement of the Greek and Turkish populations of the Mediterranean island of Cyprus, my home country, after its division in 1974. These events put the current refugee crisis in a much broader historical and cultural context. They each offer very different visions of Europe. Taken together, they also offer the opportunity to compare ways in which migrants and refugees from different backgrounds and in different time periods choose to describe their own experiences of displacement. Works of literature, film, and visual art about Mediterranean migration offer an understanding of Europe from a moving perspective. This is in sharp contrast to a grounded, or what I call a continental, perspective that takes the world's geopolitical and cultural arrangements to be set in stone. It is not accidental, then, that migrants and refugees crossing the Mediterranean are often described in liquid terms. They come in waves, they seep through borders. They are, to borrow the title of Weiwei's most recent documentary on migration, a human flow. Consider this diary entry by Greek poet and diplomat George Seferis, who was displaced to the Middle East for much of the Second World War. Describing Greek refugees fleeing the Nazi occupation of their country, Seferis writes the following: "One can almost see them. They start off sailing in their little boats from Attica or the Greek islands. They arrive in Turkey, they make their way to Egypt, and their color changes. It becomes more like ours. What happens? What made them different over there? What changes them here? Like Europa's crossing, the transformation described by Seferis is not just a metaphor. As they cross the international waters of the Mediterranean, migrants leave behind the certainty of a well-defined legal status. They are transformed from citizens to political asylum seekers or illegal aliens, and they have to confront the new places they encounter through this changed lens. Much of what defines the experience of displacement is a lack of control. Stories of migration and other works of art try to emulate this lack of control for the readers and audience. Some of the ways they do this is to subvert linear narrative expectations or causal explanations. Films do not follow rules of continuity. Stories move through many different geographical locations. Often, like the seemingly interminable journeys of displacement, these stories do not have a clear ending at all. Fixed geopolitical and cultural boundaries define much of our knowledge and political beliefs today. Stories of migration show how fluid those boundaries really are. They teach us that it is not enough to study our world as a fixed and stable object of knowledge. And while we cannot actually inhabit the perspective of displacement unless we ourselves are forced to move, we can allow ourselves to be changed by works of literature and art about migration. We can allow ourselves to become more attuned to this provisional perspective, this provisional mode of being, which is a way of life for more than 60 million people that are displaced in the world today. Thank you.